Hey everybody, what is up? Man, it's Friday. Jax, how you doing?
I am awesome.
Where
Ready
are you
for
in
the
Austin?
weekend.
Are you in
I
Austin right now?
am. I am in Austin.
Nice. How is it over there right now?
Well, it's like 105, so that's great. I think humidity is, I don't even know. I haven't been outside. I'll walk my dog this evening and I'll tell you how it is then because it'll be nice.
So, have you been in Austin since 2005 or even longer than that?
Longer than that, actually. I am a Texas native. I was born in
Okay.
Houston and I moved up to Austin around 2001, 2002, and I've been here ever since.
Nice. How much has it changed? Because I went there, I went to school there from '04 to '07 at UT. What's up, Hook'em? Um, and like every time I go back, I'm like, what city is this? I don't even recognize the Austin that I knew.
Yeah, the skyline is very different.
Yeah.
The demographics are changing. We get a lot of people moving here from out of state, people who've come to UT and end up staying because Austin is a really beautiful place. There's definitely things I miss about when it was smaller, but I'm just trying to always embrace change.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are going to do the same five questions that we always start with a guest, and we'll roll into this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history of what is happening here with cannabis in the state of Texas, and we'll get into that. So, number one, the same five questions, Jax. Are you ready?
I'm
What,
ready.
what is one song you wish everybody would listen to at least once in their life?
Oh. Wow, that is an interesting question. So I'm a big Tool fan. So
Okay.
normally I would pick one of their songs, but just because of some of the stuff that's going on in the world right now, I'd probably choose a Rage Against the Machine song. Um, and you know, it's the one that's F you, I won't do what you tell me. Sometimes I feel a little bit rebellious, and so that one speaks to me. So I think everyone should feel some rebellious, get some rage out music sometimes.
Okay, nice. That's our first rage that we've gotten
Oh,
on this question. So that's good. That we're expanding. I like it. Okay, number two, what's one thing you always have to have in your fridge?
ooh, that is a great question. I am a really big person on apples. So apples and peanut butter. I love them together.
Thank you. So yesterday, I had Deontay Burton of the Cowboys. All right, he plays for the Cowboys, professional athlete, and he said apples as well. All right,
Oh,
Honey Crisp apples. That was his thing.
I love Honeycrisp apples.
And I told him, I said, do you put peanut butter or almond butter on them? He's like, no, I don't ruin them. And I'm like, yo,
They
you
are
have
good
to.
alone. But I'm
That's
telling
like,
you, peanut
it's
butter
so
and a
good.
few chocolate chips.
Okay, so now you're turning this into a whole dessert bar.
Yeah. When I was pregnant, like literally, that's all I could eat was apples and peanut butter. So I
Man,
love it.
like I love apples, but when you add the extra peanut butter or almond butter, man, it just takes it to the next level. Okay, so everyone has to try that out. Number three, what's one place you want to visit that you haven't yet?
Oh, um,
I'm getting
you
deep today
know,
with everyone.
I have never been able to be anywhere in Asia. I've traveled in Europe some, I've traveled a little bit in South America. I would love to go in Asia. And, I'm not really sure exactly where I would pick, but that would be one of the areas I would need to investigate and go to. I want to
Okay,
travel there.
all right, not bad. Hopefully after all this, that's the first thing you do. You got to hit up Asia. I highly
Yeah.
recommend. I highly recommend Pakistan. I went back, so I was born there, and I've been back twice since. And the most recent time was in 2015. Yeah, 2015, and it is awesome. It's so. I mean, like the food there is fantastic.
Yeah.
You go to the right city. It's so great over there. It's cool. Like it's good for like a week. After that, you get sick. You are gonna get sick. There's no doubt you get sick over there. So, yeah, it's a
Sick
cool
of
place.
being there or actually
No,
sick?
like actually sick because the food you're gonna overeat because there's so much good food there. And two, you're gonna have some kind of reaction to the food there, or you accidentally get some water in you. You're not allowed to
Oh.
drink the water there. Like, our American stomachs can't handle the water over there.
We don't have the
So
microbiome for that.
no, no, no matter how many probiotics you take, all that, you're gonna get sick. Okay.
I
So
gotcha.
it's like a week is the perfect time. All right, number four, who's one person alive you want to meet and have coffee with?
Meet and have coffee with. Um, I have had the pleasure of only working remotely, but not in person with quite a few people. And so I would say that actually I would like to sit down with Dr. Ethan Russo and pick his brain a little bit in person because I've only been able to deal with him virtually, and it's a little bit different. We're
Sure.
adapting more now,
Yeah.
but that would be one of the people I would like to sit down with and have coffee.
I'm not familiar with him. Tell me a little bit more about him.
He is a preeminent cannabis scientist and knows a lot about all the different cannabinoids. He does a lot about the genetics of the
Okay.
cannabis plants and understanding how they work. So, science nerd, yes.
Okay, awesome. That's pretty cool. All right, last question. What's one app that you want to delete from your phone, but you just can't?
Discord,
Okay, why?
because people talk to me on it. That's both the reason why I want to get rid of it and why I have to keep it.
I downloaded Discord at the beginning of last month and I used it one day and I was just like, you know what? This is overwhelming. Like my notifications are going off. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. Like there's just too
Tweak those
many.
settings. Just turn it off, check it once a day. That makes it a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's the same 5 questions. Now let's get into it. So, first and foremost, tell me about yourself and exactly what you do with cannabis reform, because we can read about it, we can research a little bit more, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure. So, talking about what I'm doing right now, I'm the executive director of two educational nonprofits based here in Austin. And so I focus on engaging with the people of Texas, making sure that they're educated on cannabis and also how to get involved in our politics here. Because in Texas, we don't have ballot initiative where we can collect signatures and get on the ballot to legalize cannabis or to have greater access to medical cannabis. We have to go through our legislators. So that's one of the aspects that I do. The others is sitting down with legislators and making sure they're educated, talking to them about bills that they're drafting. They'll send it to us to review so that we can try to put some thoughtful feedback on it and make sure that they're addressing different topics that are important. And then I also facilitate events, lots of events. They used to be in person. Now we're doing them virtual, where we can broach kind of like deeper into specific topics like THC as medicine, talking about how we should be dosing, or even some people don't understand some of the drug interactions you might have between cannabis and some of your prescription drugs. So
Mm.
that's mostly what I do, is I facilitate education in a lot of different ways. And I also facilitate advocacy so that people can be engaged.
Now you've been doing some sort of reform and education since 2005, right?
Yes. So in 2005, at a political meeting I was at, I met the executive director of Texas Normal, and I started volunteering immediately and was on the board in short order. I started out doing volunteer coordination, so making sure that we had people to, work the booth or to deliver packets at the Capitol. And then I became our political and legislative coordinator, and that's where I would spearhead lobby days and all of that, making sure they were organized and people were talking to the right people. And then I became deputy director during the 2015 session, where like the cannabis topic exploded, and I was working full-time in real estate and basically spending also 40 hours a week at the Capitol, right? And it was too much to have a kid, a job, and be volunteering that much.
Yeah.
And so ultimately I became the executive director, and we turned it into the first paid position in Texas that Texas Normal had ever had, and dedicated full-time to working on cannabis. And from that point, after the next session, I realized that we really needed a 501c3, because Texas Normal is a C4, so they can lobby and work on that type of stuff. But we really needed a C3 that could focus on honing in and educating the rural populations and the legislators, right? And so that's whenever I founded Foundation for an Informed Texas. And so since then, it's just been navigating being an executive director for 2 during a pandemic. That's been real interesting. But just trying to adapt and overcome and continue to empower people.
How much has it changed since you first started, in 2005 and working your way up? Because we've had, I like off the top of my head, it feels like we've had 3 different waves, right? Since that time where you've got like, oh, no way, this is never going to happen. All right, this is never going to happen. Then you see the second wave of, okay, other states are doing it. And you start, getting more information about, hey, it's not just marijuana. There's some other benefits from cannabis, right? The CBD, and of course, Alamo Remedy. That's who I speak for, and that's how
Yeah.
we got connected. So shout out to them.
You
And
got their
now
shirt on today.
I got my shirt on. I actually just wore this around. And I'm like, oh, it's perfect. It's a
Yeah.
really good. It's a comfortable T-shirt. So thank you, Asim. And then number 3, now it's like, okay, it's our turn, right, in Texas. So this is like the third wave. But for you, how different is it now from when you first started?
Well, so the first session that I was really like going into offices and having like legit conversations and taking other people into offices and sitting down with them and their legislators was in 2007. And it was a very different atmosphere then.
Mhm.
I had seen patients be laughed at by staffers. I had seen patients, it just felt very discriminatory the way that they were treated.
Mhm.
And they were treated like second class citizens in many, many ways. That was frustrating. And I think my song choice at the beginning might tell you a little bit about my personality. When I get frustrated, I go do things. And so it just really solidified even more that I was like, okay, these people, they're ill and they don't need to also have this like extra stress of this. So I just wanted to advocate even more. And then we slowly started to see some bills come 2009, or I'm sorry, 2007 was the cite and summons bill that passed that opted in for different counties across the state. We've got a couple dozen that have opted in at this point. 2009, there was some good bills about affirmative defense and talking about medical access, but it wasn't really until 2015, after Colorado legalized in 2014, that the real big push happened. And that's when we got the Texas Compassionate Use Program,
Mhm.
which is an arguably flawed program, but Texas is growing cannabis as medicine and getting it out to patients. So it is an important step forward. And then flash forward,
Mhm.
2019, we got the hemp bill passed, which was really important. So we're seeing changes. It does seem that legislators lag behind their constituents. We have 84% of Texans that support substantive change to cannabis laws, but we've kind of seen small changes in some places. I'm hoping that we will see, especially from some of this like criminal justice and social equity conversations that are being had, that we're going to see more robust conversations in the 2021 session.
Okay, so that's awesome. That's good that the momentum is slowly. I mean, it still feels slow for somebody that's not educated on it. It feels slow, right?
Feels slow
Yeah,
to me too.
yeah. So, first, so before we get to 2014, that being such a huge moment with Colorado legalizing, let's go back to why right now is it illegal in Texas? What's the history? Why are we still not in a state where we can use it for a medicinal purpose, where it's legalized, personal use, all of that? Why is that?
So a lot of people talk about the criminalization of cannabis as starting in the 1930s, but it started earlier than that, and it started in Texas. In El Paso in 1913, 1915, passed a local ordinance that basically was the first penalty for personal possession of marijuana. Now, I say it like that because the Texas statute misspells the word, and they spell it with an H instead of a J. But that also speaks to part of the reason why they created that law. There was a lot of migrant workers, and there was a lot of racism against people of Mexican descent. And when they wrote the law, they didn't even bother to figure out how to spell the word, right?
Wow.
And so that's kind of the basis of where it has come from. You can do some research on Jim Crow law and how cannabis law has interplayed in that, and how by making marijuana illegal, it really has further created issues for people in minority demographics. And so it's been a very problematic history. And so it's very appropriate that we are talking about it where people are really ready to talk about police serving and protecting,
Mhm.
and about not wasting taxpayer funds on these offenses that in many places just make people a business person or
Yeah.
a patient, you know?
And that's slowly starting to change a little bit too now, right? With the amount you can carry personally, you know, in Houston now, you won't. They're not gonna. You're not gonna go to prison anymore for it, right? If
Right.
I'm not wrong, Austin obviously has that as well. So it's starting to change on that. How much of it is the religious background of Texas?
Oh, interesting. Well, before I go into that, I do want
Yeah.
to just put a point of clarity. So, you and I are very fortunate that we live in a large city that has had some local reforms done, right?
Hmm.
And they're only able to do it within their jurisdiction. But to fully change the law, we have to do it at the statewide level.
Sure.
So, in theory, in Houston and Dallas, it's much less likely that you're going to get in trouble. But for any Texans traveling anywhere else, the penalty is still the same. So I just want to clarify that. But talking about, um, religion and how it interplays, for some people, their religion drives them to show compassion to patients, compassion to the ill, to take care of the community. And for them, using a plant-based medicine first before pharmaceuticals is a very common sense idea.
Yeah.
So I think for some people, it's a no-brainer, if you will. But I think for other people, they might be caught up on certain things that maybe don't have to do so much with their religion as with community culture. And so I think as we start to educate in some more rural areas, the education will help people kind of see it. And I definitely think that the hemp program has been big for that, because now farmers can be growing hemp
Yeah.
in Texas, and it's the same plant as cannabis. It's a slightly different. I don't think genus is the right word. I'm spacing on exactly what it is, but I feel like that is helping bring it along. So I think religion can actually really help people soften their heart. We have held educational seminars at, uh, Unitarian Church. We've had
Mhm.
pastors and reverends come and talk about this. So I think that there's a lot of compassion there, and that should be the focus. So in some ways, it is enabling change. And in other ways, sometimes those community ethics are hindering it. So I
Yeah.
think you have to kind of go on a case by case basis evaluating that.
Compassion is such an important word, right? Because when you think about the medical side of things and patients that want to try it, right, whether it be for epilepsy, whether it be for PTSD, whatever it is, right? Like there's so many different studies out there now. There's so much research. And then you look at compassion in terms of what it does to inner city communities, right? Like what it does to that population, what it does for somebody that just wants to use it, right? I feel like we lose that compassion across so many different things, but specifically for this one, as you brought up, that lack of that, is it just simply like educating at this point now and talking to people that are still not on board?
I
What's it
think
going
it
to
is
take to
that.
what's it going to take for people to not only get that compassion and just almost get on board in terms of like, okay, you know what, this makes sense.
Well, normally, just to be very honest with you, it usually takes someone in their family being ill enough to need it.
Mm,
And that's usually where we start to see hearts and minds changed. I do know some families have actually opened up their homes to legislators to come and be in their home with them and see what it's like to have a profoundly ill child, and then to see how cannabis positively affects that. So it takes a lot of brave people doing bold things, right? Um, and I think that by that they can learn some compassion for it.
hmm.
But I also think it has to do with the very dated mindset of being, hard on crime, as hard as possible, right? And I think that we're moving to a more mindset about being smart on crime, instead of just being punitive. Let's talk about where the issues are. And that's what I think we're seeing a lot of that when people are talking about reallocating police funds back to the community. Let the community try to lovingly handle these issues through different programs. And if they can't, then we go, to the next step.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about TCUP, the Texas Compassionate Use Program that you mentioned a little bit earlier. You said there are some flaws in it right now, but that felt like we were going in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
That, okay, first we get, because based on other states as well, it's like, okay, medicinal use, but this is a little bit different. This is not like California where,
Nope.
their medical use is almost like oh, okay, now you just got to go get the card and all that.
Just go to the doctor store on the corner.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not like that. This is a little bit different. Tell me a little bit more about this program.
So Texas Compassionate Use Program was created in 2015 with Representative Click and Senator Eltife being the authors. And what it did is it legalized medical cannabis, which is low THC cannabis in this definition, meaning 0.5% THC or less. And for the first year when they enacted it into law, it was only for intractable epilepsy. Very, very limited. So you have to think about epilepsy as a portion, right? But then intractable epilepsy, so it's a very small portion. And they took a very long time rolling out the program. You know, sometimes governmental agencies move slowly. In this instance, they moved very slowly. And
was that on purpose, or is that just government red tape?
So after seeing how quickly the hemp program has been rolled out, I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not, but it sure seems like it, because they basically pushed it off to starting until right before the 2017 legislative session. And so they're like, well, we haven't seen it in practice. We can't expand it at all. So I think that it was a little bit of an excuse to maybe not have to do more, but I can't say that as a fact. So just personal opinion there. But then in 2019, and I want to say also in conjunction with this bill, every year, there's also been a very comprehensive medical cannabis program that would let doctors decide what kind of cannabis patients should use for an extremely large portion of patients. So that bill continually kept getting killed while the low THC bill was moved forward. And so then in this session, they kept the THC ratio the same, but they did add about 8 or 9 different conditions, one of those being neurodegenerative disorders. So that was not an official term before. So the Department of State Health Services had to create a definition for it. And that definition includes a couple 100-ish different conditions. So it has greatly expanded, but they have still really kept the THC limited. And to give perspective, when we're talking about the hemp program, where you can, you know, kind of buy over the counter almost anywhere in Texas at this point, they allow 0.3% THC. And the teacup program allows 0.2. I'm sorry, 0.5. And that's a very small difference. For some people, that might be helpful. But most of the reason why people get into the compassionate use program is to protect themselves, to have a legal means for their child or for themselves to be using this medicine that won't get CPS involved. So I anticipate, you know, last session, there was a Republican doctor who's a senator, Dr. Campbell, and she authored a bill that would 1% THC and no list of conditions. Let the doctor decide how to prescribe it. And so I do think that in the 2021 session, we're going to have some robust conversations about THC dosing, and additional conditions. So I'm hopeful that we can make the program more functional. Last that I had heard, you know, there's 3 licensees, and they service about 1,500-ish or less patients in the state of Texas. That is a very small patient pool. And their licensing fees every 2 years are about $1 million.
What?
So they are not making money, none of them. They're holding on to those licenses until the legislators can give them a robust program where they can actually make the business function for themselves. And
are there other states that we can look at in terms of the THC levels that initially were approved for medical use, and the benefits, and, you know, any cons that have come from that?
Yeah, there are a lot of states with a lot of information, and it shows that, you know, like for PTSD, about 10 to 14% THC is really helpful for people. So there's a lot of data on that, and we definitely provided that data. But the lieutenant governor had originally said, you know, like he didn't want any cannabis bills passing out of the Senate. And ultimately, we ended up getting the hemp program and some expansion of the Texas Compassionate Use Program. So ultimately, we got more than I think he wanted to give people, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Okay, so how did the hemp program move forward so fast? And the hemp program is the use of, like, you can buy CBD products, you can
more than that now.
Okay, tell me more.
Farmers can grow cannabis in Texas.
Okay.
It's hemp cannabis, so it has to be low THC. There's quite a few regulations with that, but There are licensed farmers, last I checked, almost 1,000, I think it was, that are planning on growing. Now, hemp can be grown for a industrial use, so like plastics, fibers like cloth, right? Or it can be grown for human consumables. So your CBD, your CBG, all of these cannabinoids and terpenes that are found in the plant. So people who grow for an industrial use will kind of have one way that they grow their plant, and people who grow for human consumables will have another. It also is going to allow, they're finishing the manufacturing licensing regulations right now. So people will be able to start licensing probably in the next 2 months, I would guess, for manufacturing. So turning that product either into fabric or into an oil tincture that someone consumes. And then the last licensing that will be available will be retail. So currently retailers are all grandfathered in, and you are allowed to sell whatever you have on your shelves as of right now. But once those regulations and licenses are available, you will have to license for your facility and or facilities. And you'll have to make sure that you comply by their retail regulations and all of that. So it's creating a whole new business infrastructure. Yeah. I do think that it's going, the first year of growing here in Texas, unfortunately, because we haven't had seeds that have been certified in the state of Texas, because that's a 5-year process. It's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for people. So I'm hopeful that it will go well. We will continue to see it grow. There are a few regulatory hurdles that I think we're going to have to get changed. One of those is, and you may have heard a little bit about this from Asim, is that they want to ban all smokable items for retail. That was in the statute, but now regulators are trying to say that also now you cannot manufacture for smokable here in Texas anymore. Wow. And so smokable is like, your pre-rolls or your vape cartridges. And for some people, that's like 40 to 60% of so, and you can still import it and you can sell it online, but you can't sell it in your store. So it's just one of these things for Texas businesses that we're going to have to get worked out.
Why is that? I mean, that's so confused. Like, hypothetically,
I'll tell you.
Yeah, tell me, because I'm so confused by it. It seems like anybody in the government side of things would be like, hey, great, more products, more taxes, more money for the state, right? Like, is it that simple? But what is it? Why are these little itty bitty regulations that ruin so many, potentially great projects happen?
So when the hemp program was made effective, previously law enforcement would see something that looked like cannabis, say it was cannabis, and they could charge you with possession of it. They didn't have to prove it was cannabis because it looked like it, it smells like it, right? Yeah. Now you've got 2 categories of cannabis. You've got legal cannabis, 0.3% or less, and then you've got illicit cannabis, which is more than that. When you look at them, you can't tell the THC level just by looking at these products. So now you have to test. Testing is expensive. So they don't want people to have these items that they might mistake for illegal products and have to test, right? Well, here's the problem. Stop testing it then. Stop arresting people for it then. If it's legal, stop using the smell of it as a reason to search cars then, right? So I think that in one aspect, law enforcement is really holding on to the ability to use cannabis, not only, to ticket people, but to get into their cars and vehicles and look for further issues. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. And additionally, last session, I don't know if you know this, but they changed the nicotine smoking age in Texas to be 21. Yeah. And, however you may feel about that, it's just they're really they're anti-smoking culture, which is, fine. Many people choose to then vape instead. But as you probably know, we had that EVALI vaping lung issue that was happening before, COVID started. And Texas was having a problem with it because of the illicit products. When you go and you look at legal states that have safe and legal access, people were not having those problems. There was like 2 or 3 instances of it happening. But in Texas, it was all illicit vape cartridges. So it's a public health issue about making sure people have safe products. And it's an issue of law enforcement letting go of these ways that they use to seize asset from citizens.
Man, that makes no sense to me. That point right there in itself is if you go to a medically approved place or you go to a approved place that has a license, you're buying the right stuff. You know, if it's not, that they're going to get in trouble, right? Like we can trace it back to I got it from here, right? If something happens, that makes no sense. Now, you know, the money that would come in from that, you know, from other states, as you see, now correct me if I'm wrong. It's been awesome in every state that has legalized, right?
The only place that had a bit of issue was Canada, and it was a total governmental program. And so the governmental waste ate all of their profit.
Yeah.
But if you look in the other places, yes, absolutely. It's been very
Comparable
successful.
states. Yeah. If you look here in the United States,
And they estimate $1 billion for Texas. And that's just with, you know, kind of like a nominal licensing structure and everything, that $1 billion. I mean, that's significant, especially during times whenever we're having budget, like real ones.
Yeah, major budget issues right now. I mean, it could improve so much. So why is it? Why is it in now when we look at big money, right? When you go, hey, this is the potential earning for the state. What is the holdup? Because it feel like in government, money always wins, right? You know, but is it, you know, I don't know if it's a myth or what, you know, just from the outside looking in, is it, you got big pharma as well competing for those dollars as well? Is it the police? What is it? Why is it not getting through to our state that there's a lot of money to be made for everyone?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of conspiratorial reasons that I think that we all could lean into. And I think that they factor in. I do want to point out that a lot of private prisons in Texas have closed recently. So the private prison racket is really not quite as pertinent as it used to be. I think pharmaceuticals, they want to get into the individual cannabinoids and really research them. And I welcome that, but not at the cost of you know, people having safe access, right? Because it's a plant that arguably, you know, no one's died from using cannabis. You might become very uncomfortable, but you will not die. And so I think that pharma plays a role in it, but maybe not a super major role in Texas. Law enforcement is a big role. Whenever we go to the Capitol, the only people that we see talking against it are executive law enforcement associations. So Texas Police Chiefs Association and Texas Sheriffs Association. And the reason why is that the chiefs and the sheriffs are in charge of the budgets. And what they do is they use cannabis as a reason to seize assets. They take those assets and instead of relinquishing them back to the state and giving a portion of it to the state, they bypass the state and go to the DEA. They then have the DEA do whatever they do with those assets and then give them back a portion. So the DEA keeps like 20, 30%, they keep like 80, 70%, and they skip having to share any with the state. So it's a budgetary item for a lot of people out there. And then another thing that I would bring up is that leadership, the political leadership. We saw every cannabis bill pass out of the House in a bipartisan supermajority, overwhelming support. The lieutenant governor was that pinch gap. The governor in the past had been, but he's starting to really come around on some things. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I'm hopeful that we can do the same thing with the lieutenant governor, because he's going to be a lieutenant governor up until he's up for election. And is it, I think, 2022. So we have work to do.
Now, what can we do? People that are listening to the podcast, people that are interested in this, you know, citizens, what can we do as Texans?
So the Texas Normal website has a great resource. It's our activist training guide. You can go to resources, take action, and click on that and kind of learn really in depth what you can do. But overall, it's this. Make sure you're subscribed to what we're doing so that you know when there's an action that comes up. Because we can't collect signatures, it's extremely important that we create public outcry when things happen or public engagement in some manner. So we'll often say, email this person, message, call this person, right? Make sure that you're registered to vote and take a look at the Texas Normal website. It has a voter's guide that you can look at to see how people voted on bills in the past and how they stand on these different positions. And then during the legislative session, for your people who might not be in Austin, make sure that you're in contact with your state representative and your state senator and make sure they know how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have a line of communication to the lieutenant governor, just maybe make a donation in medical marijuana's name to him or something like that, to just show that we want his support and we need his support and patients need it. There's a lot of other little things that you can do, but I think those are really the key things to being engaged.
Jax, what would happen if marijuana, cannabis is legalized as a nation, as a law now? What would Texas fight it? What do you think would happen if it's legalized across the country?
So interesting question. Actually, Texas had to change our hemp statute because the CSA, Controlled Substance Act, at the federal level changed the definition of marijuana to exclude hemp products, right? So that forced a change within a certain time period here in Texas in March. And that's when legislators were like, oh, what's that? Oh, we have to create a bill, or the USDA just tells us to. And so they went forth and they made their own program. So it could follow in the same manner for adult use or medical cannabis or decriminalization.
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on how they address the state's rights issue, which is that states can kind of choose to do what they want on programs within their borders. So I think that there's enough support within the state legislature to make some significant changes if it did come down to just it being us. But if the CSA changes and removes cannabis from the CSA, Texas has to follow suit. They're going to have to come up with what that's going to look like. So it would be very interesting and I would love it.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that is like, it's almost like if we had to pick one fight, right? Is it let's change it on a state level, or do we put all of our resources and time and volunteer hours, all that behind trying to get it legalized on a national level? That's why I was asking that question, is what would be faster, right? Like that.
No, I think it all depends on who's in the office and who's around them.
Mm-hmm.
Both of the presidential candidates for the Democrats and the Republicans are not necessarily the strongest on this issue, unfortunately. Yeah. And so, maybe at this time, working at the state level would be more important. But I think it's very important to note that there are different organizations focusing on each. So you can very easily support some of these nationwide campaigns as well. And I would encourage you, during the quote unquote off season in Texas, because we have a 2-year cycle, to definitely engage in that. And we always pass forward the information and actions that we get from our coalition allies, so that people can also be putting pressure there. And working at the local level, we recently worked on this Decrim ATX resolution that passed that basically defunded any testing of THC, any personnel being used for it, and also directed APD to stop arresting for any offenses, which our DA had said basically under 4 ounces of flour and personal amounts of concentrates, which FYI are a felony in Texas, that they're not going to prosecute on. So,
man, how much did CBD help? The popularization in the last, 2.5 years, 3 years almost. It's become, they're like cupcake stores now. You see CBD stores everywhere. Remember, like in 2008, 2009, we had cupcake stores everywhere. Yep. Now it's CBD stores everywhere. How much has that helped with public momentum and making sure that I don't know how they are in rural areas, because frankly, I haven't seen many, like driving to Austin or anything like that. But how much has it helped?
Well, I'll tell you, I have seen them in rural areas.
Really?
Back in January, I did a 12-city tour with my organization and Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy. And I mean, when we were in Lubbock, there were 3 on the same street.
Wow.
3. Yeah. So, they're out there. And what they do is they really let grandma and grandpa realize that it's not scary, because, THC was the first molecule that was identified by Dr. Mashula in Israel. And because it was psychoactive, I think for some people, they just made it into a boogeyman. So CBD was kind of like the next cannabinoid where people were like, oh, this isn't as scary, forgetting the fact that, your Benadryl is psychoactive.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. I think it's just made it a little bit more commonplace.
Okay, that's awesome to hear. Before I let you go, what is one common myth, misconception that you'd like to clear up or talk about in terms of what's happening in Texas?
Ooh, there is a very common misconception that cannabis is totally decriminalized and that you can easily get medical marijuana. I don't know where they got
Yeah,
it
where?
from, but that is a very common misconception. So I just would tell people, in the bigger cities, you're probably going to be more safe. Be very careful in rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say that if you're someone who needs medical cannabis, it's a pretty high percentage that this current program won't help you and you won't be able to get access to it. So I just want people to know that we have it, it's there, but we have a lot of work to do. And don't just read the clickbait headline on the article, always click it
Yeah.
and read what it really says.
What is the process, real quickly, with Teacup? What is it if a child needs it?
Yeah, so they would go and have to see a
Are they going through
registered
the
doctor.
doctors? Proved some.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I
And
had a little jump in the video. I
yeah, sorry.
apologize for speaking over you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So what is it right now? There's only a handful of doctors that you mentioned earlier that can actually prescribe it. What's the process like?
Yes, you are absolutely correct. So there are doctors that they register for the program. They
Mm-hmm.
apply to be a doctor and prescribe it. They used to have that list public. It is not public anymore. So you as a patient would have to figure out who you could go and see
Why is
and
it not
try.
public?
I couldn't tell you.
Oh,
Some people said that some doctors were just getting too inundated with calls about people who
okay.
misunderstood the program. It could be that some doctors maybe didn't want to advertise that they were doing it. It could be a HIPAA thing,
Man.
a medley of those probably is what happened. But it's not publicly available. So you have to find that person and then go see them, and they have to agree that it will work for you. And then they write you a little prescription. And as I mentioned, there's only 3 licensees, and only really one of them is super active, but they deliver throughout the state. So
Okay.
that I'm very thankful for, that at least once the person has been able to go through all this process, that it can at least be delivered to them.
That's so ridiculous that you have to go on this boogeyman hunt almost.
Yeah, and
You gotta find Sasquatch somewhere and make sure that they can prescribe it to you when you're in need. And oh, that's just so frustrating. Why? Oh,
And
why is
last
that?
time I was able to see the list which was like last year. There were no doctors in the Rio Grande Valley area, and a colleague of mine has a daughter who really needs to qualify, and she just couldn't get the 5 hours to drive her to the specialist. I mean, so these are some of the things that when you have a restrictive program become problematic
Mhm.
for people.
Damn, we're so dumb sometimes. I promise, government. Gosh, sorry. So frustrating to hear that.
Yeah.
Jax, thank you so much. I know it's been crazy during the pandemic for you and trying to navigate through all of this. So 2021, it's a big year for us in Texas. There's a lot going on. Make sure you go to informtexas.org. What other websites again? And I'll put them in the description of this episode for the audio side as well.
So texasnormal.org will have a lot of the political and lobbying information, and then informedtexas.org will have a lot of the educational content. There is a veteran conference that we're putting together in October. It will all be online, and it will be easily available for the public. And then, right now we're just really having a lot of conversations about what does the legislative session even look like during a pandemic.
That's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I can't even
Wild
imagine.
ride.
Man, Jax, thank you so much. Stay safe up there in Austin. And hopefully when this is all over, we'll meet in person.
Yeah, that would be great. It's really nice chatting with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will talk to you next time. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review to the podcast.